No one wants you there, my sister whispered in the kitchen. You're a walking disaster, my cousin added. I just hugged my dog and left quietly. When I was featured in Forbes months later, they suddenly remembered my number. I had hit rock bottom. After walking away from a draining marriage and leaving my high-paying but miserable job, I moved back to my hometown to start over. It wasn't easy. My family didn't understand. My sister and cousin made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. That was the last straw. I hugged my dog and walked out quietly that day. Months later, after building something from nothing and being featured in Forbes, those same relatives came crawling back like nothing had happened. That Thanksgiving, it was raining. The kind of soft, steady rain that makes everything feel heavier. My old raincoat clung to me as I carried a homemade pumpkin pie in one hand and Miso's leash in the other. Miso is my dog, a mutt with mismatched ears and a loyalty that never wavered, even when I did. I hadn't planned to go. Honestly, I'd stared at the invitation email for weeks. A part of me thought, maybe things would be different this time. Maybe they'd see that I was trying. That I wasn't just floating through life, that I hadn't failed. I was wrong. Inside, the house smelled like cloves and turkey. People were buzzing, pouring wine, taking selfies, pulling side dishes out of the oven. I got a few distracted hellos, a couple of awkward smiles. I placed the pie on the counter, unsure where to stand, and petted Miso, who was curled quietly by my feet. That's when it happened. Luann, my sister, walked by, brushing a dish towel on her hands. She leaned in, not looking at me. No one wants you here, she said. Soft, like it was just an observation, not an insult. Before I could even process that, Warren, my cousin, always eager to perform for an audience, chimed in from behind me. You're a walking disaster, Marlene. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask them why they hated me so much or remind them I was their family too. I just bent down, hugged Miso around the neck, and walked out the back door. It was like being released from a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I drove for hours, windows cracked just enough to let in the cold air. I ended up parking by Saratoga Lake. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the water ripple in the darkness while Miso dozed in the back. For weeks afterward, I kept to myself. No family calls, no emails. I worked. That's all I did. I threw myself into freelance gigs, building websites, doing branding for small businesses. I'd always been good at marketing. I just never had the guts to do it alone. My first real client was a woman named Aileen, who ran a skincare startup in Ithaca. She was overwhelmed, needed help fast, and didn't have a big budget. I gave her a discount, poured everything into it. Her sales skyrocketed. She sent me a thank you card and 3 referrals. That was the moment I realized maybe I wasn't a disaster. Maybe I just wasn't meant to fit into the life my family expected me to have. In the span of 6 months, I registered my LLC, built a network of small business clients, and hired 2 assistants remotely. I called my company Rooted because that's what I felt like I was finally becoming: stable, grounded, real. I wasn't trying to get rich. I just wanted to build something honest. Something that couldn't be taken away by a failed marriage or a judgmental sibling. And then Forbes emailed me. At first, I thought it was a scam. We're doing a piece on women over 35 who launched successful businesses after major life changes. They wanted to feature me. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. I reread the article when it was published 10 times over. My photo was there. My story. My voice, not filtered through someone else's expectations or criticisms. And then, my phone lit up. The text from Luann came first. Short. Almost sterile. Saw your Forbes thing. Congrats. No punctuation. No warmth. It didn't surprise me. Then Warren called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was awkward, filled with pauses and stilted words. Hey, Marlene. Saw your feature. That's, impressive. Listen, my buddy's opening a fitness brand, might need someone to help with, online stuff. Thought of you. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over the delete button. Instead, I put it face down on the counter and walked Miso. That walk felt different. The same sidewalks, the same smells from the diner on the corner, the same old bookstore with the dusty windows, but I wasn't the same. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. The handwriting was shaky. It was from my father. He had barely spoken to me since I moved back. Our conversations had always been strained, mostly small talk or mild disapproval hidden behind neutral tones. Marlene, I saw the article. I was wrong about a lot of things. Maybe not just you, but how I judged what success should look like. I'm glad you found your own way. Dad, no love, Dad. No invitation to talk. But it was more than he'd ever given me before. I sat on my couch with Miso pressed against my leg, letter in hand, and cried. Not because I forgave him. Not because it made everything okay. But because I had lived long enough to hear it. The calls and messages kept coming. My aunt called to ask if I was coming to her anniversary party. Luan left another message offering to grab lunch, just catch up. Warren emailed me again, this time with a subject line that said business opportunity in all caps. It was surreal. These were the same people who told me I was a mess. Who watched me unravel and acted like it made them superior. Who turned their backs when I needed grace. And now, they wanted in. I didn't respond to most of them right away. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, or if I wanted to say anything at all. Not out of spite, but because I'd finally created space that felt peaceful, and I didn't know if I wanted to let them into that. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the sharp, burning way I used to be. But I was wary. Cautious. And that, I think, is what growth actually looks like, not just forgiving, but deciding what you'll tolerate moving forward. Weeks passed. The buzz around the article died down, but the changes it triggered stuck. Rooted was growing steadily. I was no longer taking every client that came along. I could afford to be selective. I focused on working with women-owned businesses that reminded me of myself, scrappy, passionate, often overlooked. I hired a young designer from Denver who had been laid off during the pandemic and thought her career was over. I brought on a single mom from Atlanta to manage our social media accounts remotely. We worked asynchronously, connected by Slack, video calls, and a shared desire to build something meaningful. It didn't matter that we weren't in the same city. We were aligned. My days had rhythm now, quiet mornings with coffee, long work sessions broken by Miso nudging me for a walk, and evenings spent reading or listening to podcasts. My life was small but full. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dread getting out of bed. But the family wasn't going away. My mother called one afternoon while I was knee-deep in campaign planning for a Brooklyn-based artist launching her first product line. Your sister's throwing a dinner party next month. She wants you there. Her voice was light, like she was asking me to go to the store, not re-enter the arena. I'm busy that weekend, I said without hesitation. There was a pause. Then, you're always busy lately. It wasn't accusatory. It was surprised. Maybe she'd expected I was still drifting, still unstable. The truth was, I had meetings lined up with investors and a speaking engagement at a women's business panel in Chicago. I wasn't avoiding the dinner to punish them. I was just elsewhere now. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't crave their attention. But the tension lingered. Eventually, I agreed to have coffee with Luann. She asked twice. I turned her down the first time, but the second time, I was curious. Not hopeful, just curious. We met at a cafe near Congress Park. I got there early, chose a table by the window. When she walked in, she looked thinner than I remembered, maybe more tired. I didn't think you'd come, she said as she sat down. I almost didn't. The conversation was stiff at first. She talked about her kids, her Pilates class, her job at the firm. I listened, nodded. Then, as she stirred her tea, she finally said, "I was a witch to you." I blinked. She didn't look at me when she said it. I was embarrassed, I guess. "You came back here with nothing." And I didn't want to admit I was jealous. That caught me off guard. Jealous of what? "You had the guts to leave. Your marriage. Your job. Everything that wasn't working." I stayed, and I'm still stuck in it. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I sat there, watching her stir that tea over and over like she could mix her guilt into the bottom of the cup and leave it there. It was tempting to reach across the table, to say something that would patch things up, make it easier. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I asked, "Why say something like that at Thanksgiving? Why tell me no one wanted me there?" Luann's face went pale. She looked out the window, lips pressed tight. "I don't know," she said eventually. "I was mean. We were all mean. Warren was worse, but I didn't stop him either. I didn't think you were ever going to make it out of that place you were in. I figured you'd come crawling back for help, and it scared me." "Scared you?" She nodded, still not looking at me. "Because I didn't want to be the one who had to help you. Because I didn't know how. I thought if I pushed you away first, it wouldn't be my problem." There it was. Honesty. Ugly and messy and long overdue. I let the silence stretch. She didn't try to fill it. Eventually, I said, "I didn't come back to make anyone responsible for me. I just needed a place to breathe." She nodded again. "I know that now." After that coffee, I didn't feel forgiven. I didn't feel like we'd healed something. But I felt released. Like the weight of that day, those words didn't sit so tightly on my chest anymore. We didn't become best friends overnight. There were no weekly brunches or long sisterly texts. But the air between us shifted. She sent me pictures of her kids sometimes. I replied with a thumbs up or a heart. It was a start. Warren, on the other hand, wasn't interested in apologies. He invited me to his wedding via email. A formal invitation came in the mail too, heavy cream paper with embossed gold lettering. No note. Just names, a date, and a venue. I didn't RSVP. A week later, he texted. "Hey, you coming to the wedding or nah? No hard feelings, right?" That made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. Miso barked, tail thumping as if she agreed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I didn't owe him anything, not an explanation, not a presence. Sometimes people want access to the version of you that's thriving, without ever acknowledging what they did to the version of you that was breaking. My parents were quieter than usual in all of this. My mother made a few gentle attempts to invite me to dinners, but I kept declining. Politely. She didn't push. My father didn't call. But every once in a while I'd get a forwarded email from him, an article about small business trends, or a link to a podcast on digital marketing. His way of saying, "I see you." Around early spring, something shifted. Maybe it was the longer days or the way the air felt lighter, but I started running into people from my past more often, high school classmates, former coworkers, even my ex-husband's sister at the farmer's market. It was always the same sequence: surprise, hesitation, then that carefully curious tone. "So, what are you up to these days?" I never bragged. I just told the truth. I run a marketing company. We work with women-owned startups across the country. They'd nod slowly, their expression sliding into that polite but shocked look. Like they couldn't reconcile the Marlene they thought they knew with the one standing in front of them now, calm, confident, together. It made me realize how many people had written me off. Like the moment I stopped following a familiar script, marriage, career, house, I stopped existing as someone worth respecting. I got an email from a journalist in April. She'd read the Forbes piece and wanted to do a follow-up interview focused more on the emotional toll of rebuilding from nothing, especially in the face of personal loss and family rejection. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to reopen all of that. But then I thought about the women I worked with every day. The ones who wrote to me late at night asking, "Do you ever feel like you're faking it?" Or, "How do you deal with everyone thinking you failed?" So I said yes. The interview ran a few weeks later on a women's entrepreneurship blog. It was rawer than the Forbes piece. I talked openly about the breakdown of my marriage, the toxic culture in my old job, the Thanksgiving I walked out of without saying goodbye. I didn't name names, but I didn't soften anything either. The response was overwhelming. I got emails from strangers who said they cried reading it. Messages from women in their 40s and 50s telling me they thought it was too late for them, but maybe it wasn't. Even a few quiet DMs from people I knew, admitting they'd treated me unfairly back when I was struggling. None from Warren. But one from Luann. Read the new article. You're brave. I didn't see that before. I'm sorry again. Short. No expectations. Just a note. And for once, I believed her. By late spring, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership summit in Chicago. It wasn't a massive event, but it was respectable, organized, filled with thoughtful attendees, and focused on stories that didn't usually get the spotlight. I almost turned it down out of nerves. I'd never spoken to a live audience before. But something in me knew I had to do it, not for recognition, but for that version of myself from a year ago. The one sitting in her car on Thanksgiving night wondering what came next. The flight was uneventful, the hotel simple but warm. I practiced in front of the mirror, over and over, until the words felt like my own skin. My segment was called "When Starting Over Isn't a Failure." The morning of the event, I sat in a green room surrounded by other speakers. A woman in her 50s who left a decades-long abusive marriage to open a bakery. A 20-something who dropped out of law school to create a nonprofit for inner-city teens. Every one of us had fallen out of someone else's version of success and built something better. When I stepped onto the stage, the lights blinded me for a moment. But then I found one face in the crowd, a woman who looked tired, scared, and hopeful. Like she needed a reason not to give up. I told the story. My story. Not polished. Not grand. Just true. And when I was done, the applause felt like something I didn't know I'd been needing. Back in Saratoga, things didn't return to how they were. They evolved. Rooted got its biggest client yet, a wellness brand backed by a mid-sized investor. We negotiated our first long-term contract. I celebrated by buying myself a second-hand espresso machine and taking a 2-day break, which for me, felt like a luxury vacation. Luann started checking in now and then. Short messages. Sometimes she asked about work. Sometimes she just shared a photo of a sunset or her daughter's artwork. We didn't talk about the past anymore. But we didn't ignore it either. It hung there quietly, like an old photo tucked in the back of a drawer, visible when needed, but not displayed. Warren never reached out again. I heard through my mother that his wedding had been perfect. I hoped it had. Not out of pettiness. I just didn't want to carry bitterness anymore. That weight was his now, not mine. Then, in early summer, I got a letter. Handwritten again. Same shaky script. My father. Saw the Chicago clip. Your mom showed me. You looked comfortable. Strong. Like you finally belonged to yourself. I never told you this, but when you left your job and came back, I thought you were giving up. Now I see you were just getting ready to build something. Don't let anyone make you feel like that wasn't brave. I read it twice. 3 times. Folded it carefully and put it in the top drawer of my desk. I didn't need more than that. But it still meant something. Summer settled into Saratoga with its usual charm, warm nights, farmers markets bursting with color, music drifting out of bars on Broadway. I found myself walking Miso longer in the evenings, letting her sniff every blade of grass while I watched the sun turn the sky soft pink. Life didn't feel extraordinary, but it felt solid. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I wasn't apologizing for breathing differently than the rest of my family. I was just living. I spent most mornings working from the tiny table near my window, sunlight cutting across my laptop, coffee cooling slowly as I lost myself in planning, writing, designing. My team had grown. We weren't huge, just 6 of us now, but we worked with rhythm. Respect. No corporate jargon, no power games, no toxicity. I hosted our first virtual retreat in July. We wore sweatpants and drank wine on Zoom. It was ridiculous and perfect. We shared our wins, our challenges, our fears. We talked about burnout, boundaries, and what success really looked like for each of us. No one said profit margins once. One morning, I walked into the local co-op and spotted Mrs. Feldman, my 10th grade English teacher, standing near the honey display. She hadn't aged a day, still wore her hair in that severe braid that gave her the look of someone who never let students get away with anything. She recognized me instantly. "Marlene?" I smiled. "Hi, Mrs. Feldman." She gave me a once-over, then reached for a jar of local clover honey. "I read about you. Forbes, right? And the talk in Chicago." I nodded, surprised. "I always told you your writing had clarity," she said, like no time had passed. "You just needed something real to say." It was the smallest sentence. But it landed like a gift. We talked for a while. She asked what I was working on. I told her about Rooted, about the women we helped. She asked if I ever taught workshops or mentored young people. The idea had crossed my mind before, but hearing her suggest it felt like something clicking into place. That afternoon, I emailed a contact at the local library. By the end of the week, I was scheduled to run a free workshop for women thinking about starting businesses later in life. Just one. To start. The group was small. 8 women. Most of them older than me. Some widowed, some divorced, some retired and restless. One woman whispered before we began, "I feel silly doing this at my age." I smiled and said, "So did I." We sat in a circle. No PowerPoint, no podium. Just notebooks, coffee, and honest questions. I told them about Miso, about crying in my car by the lake, about the tiny wins that felt huge when I had nothing else. And then they told me their stories. By the end of the hour, we weren't talking about business plans. We were talking about permission. To start. To fail. To change. That night, I walked home with a full heart. The kind of full that doesn't feel loud or showy, just sure. The workshops became monthly. Then bi-monthly. The library asked if I wanted to make it a regular program. A community college reached out. Before long, I was mentoring women in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, some starting businesses, others simply needing someone to say, "You're allowed to change." That summer, Rooted was featured in a national campaign about women-led companies redefining the business landscape. I didn't expect much from it. Just another nice mention. But 2 weeks after it ran, I got a call from a major publisher. They wanted a book. A collection of essays, mine, and the stories of the women I'd worked with. I laughed out loud when they said it. Not because I didn't believe it could happen, but because I could so clearly picture Luann and Warren reading that email over my shoulder with slack jaws. I said yes. The deal was modest. No 6-figure advance. But it was real. I worked on the book in the evenings, often long after Miso had curled up and dozed off. It wasn't a memoir. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. Evolution. Quiet wins. And I dedicated the book to the woman I used to be. I'm proud of her for keeping the door open long enough for me to walk through. When the book came out, it didn't hit any bestseller lists. But it got good reviews. People reached out. Book clubs emailed. I got invited to speak again. NPR wanted a quote. And then the calls from my family changed. No longer half-hearted congratulations or awkward pitches. Now they were full of questions, real ones. My mom started asking about the women in my workshops. My dad sent a letter every few weeks, always brief but warmer. My aunt mailed me a newspaper clipping about me that she'd cut out and saved. Even Luann invited me to her birthday brunch. I declined, but kindly. And with no guilt. Then came the kicker. I was asked to speak at an entrepreneurship conference in Albany. It was a regional event but well-funded and respected. Guess who was one of the keynote sponsors? Warren's company. He didn't know I'd been invited. I only learned he was involved when I saw the brochure. His name was listed as Strategic Growth Advisor for a firm backing one of the panels. I didn't hesitate. I accepted the invite. The event was held at a large downtown hotel. I wore a navy blue blazer, jeans, and my favorite black boots. Simple. Confident. Me. When I stepped onto the stage, I didn't scan the room for familiar faces. I didn't need to. I knew who was there. The lights were hot, but I was calm. I spoke for 20 minutes. Not about how I'd been dismissed, or shamed, or underestimated, but about how women like me were building empires out of broken blueprints. About how failure wasn't the end, just the edit. When I walked off stage, the applause felt earned. Later, during the mixer, I saw Warren across the room. He was with a group of colleagues, drink in hand, laughing a little too loudly. Then he saw me. His face changed. He walked over, feigning confidence. I knew that look. Didn't expect to see you here, he said, trying for casual. Really? I said, tilting my head. They invited me. He paused. That was quite a talk. Congrats on the book, by the way. Thanks, I said. It's doing better than anyone expected. I didn't offer more. I didn't ask about his company or pretend to be impressed. I just let the silence sit. Eventually, he shifted. Maybe we could talk sometime. I've got a new project that could use your expertise. I smiled. Not coldly. Just, finally in control. I appreciate that, Warren, I said. But I'm booked out for the next year. Prioritizing clients who believed in me before the headlines. I watched his mouth open, then close again. No snide comment. No slick comeback. Just a slow, reluctant nod. I turned and walked away. Back home that night, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my porch with miso, and breathed in the summer air. The world was quiet. The stars were out. My phone buzzed with another email. Someone had read the book and wanted to talk about launching her dream business. I smiled. This was the revenge I hadn't planned. Not proving them wrong, but proving myself right. And choosing, every day, not to go back to the version of life where I had to ask permission to be enough.